Hey everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Terry Hunter. I'm an intuitive astrologer, and I'm here today to talk about the full moon in Scorpio. It's going to be at 11 degrees on May 1st, 2026 at 10:23 a.m. We have full moons and new moons every month. The full moon cycle is where the sun and the moon are in an opposition, and the moon is reflecting the sun's light, making it the brightest phase of the moon, where it is said there are endings. I don't know if I personally believe that. I believe there are illuminations, there are conclusions to draw, there is information that comes in either through the outside or through my own epiphanies that allows me an opportunity to start anew. Um, the new moon for me personally is more of an initiation, something I'm doing in faith. A full moon is giving me a new beginning based on information, based on, the clarity of the full moon. Now, Scorpio, in and of itself, is an intense sign. It is deeply psychological. It can be criminal in its awareness of where your vulnerabilities are and how to twist them when it wants to. It also can inspire you to the greatest heights of your power. So this is what this moon is going to ask of us. The moon itself is the focal point of what's called a yod, or the finger of God. This is a point that is a fated call to action. It feels like destiny is knocking on my door. And here, with the moon being the apex, the focal point, it's all about your emotional body, about nurturing, about how you perceive yourself in the way of being able to give and receive love. A yod is comprised of two quincunxes pointing towards the focal point in a sextile to one another. A quincunx is like a blind spot. It's where the planets involved don't really have anything in common and can't really see eye to eye. A sextile is a favorable aspect, but it requires an activation. It requires the the person involved, or the aspect, I shouldn't say the aspect. If it's in your natal chart, then it's for you. If it's in transit, it requires that where it falls in your chart to be activated. So here, I'm going to pull up the chart right now, and I'm going to talk about um, the different dynamics that are going on, what this means to have a full moon and have the focal point be the moon, and the sun is in a position called a boomerang. So in a yod, any planet that is between the two planets that are in sextile is in an opposition, and the opposition creates a bounce back. So here, what we're probably looking at is, or I should say, I think for sure we're looking at, but depending upon where it is in your chart, the ego. The ego is being reflected, my willingness to stand in my light, the sun's energy and what it represents in my chart, male authorities, your father figure, your masculine energy. And it doesn't always have to be out of balance where you're too egotistical. You could have not enough of your sun shining out into the world. So this finger of God is a call to action, a destined, fated point where we each get to look at ourselves and assess how we are shining our light, how our ego is facilitating what we want at the deepest level of our emotional body. And there's a lot of things going on. So let me pull up the chart. Where's my little share button? There it is. Okay. Now I have the chart already set up for the focal point being the moon. So here we see the quincunx to Saturn. We see a quincunx to Venus. And Venus is conjunct the fixed star Aldebaran, the watcher of the East, one of the four royal stars of Persia. this is even makes this full moon even more intense and powerful because this, well, I'll talk about Aldebaran in a moment. Let me focus in on the elements of the yod itself. Okay. So here's the moon at 11 degrees. The 11th degree is the 11, everyone, or I shouldn't say everyone, but most people know the angel numbers 1111. Oh, make a wish. But it's also the master number of thought. In Christopher Witecki's step system, it is the degree that represents the Virgonian energy and the Chiron underbelly, where the wound that we carry, that we cannot escape. It is what it is. The die is cast, but when the transference of that wound into wisdom and purpose, then we have power. So here, this is about your emotional body, how it derives pleasure. The fifth house is a natural house. This is the natural house of the wheel at the time of the full moon. Where Scorpio is in your chart is where this focus will be. It doesn't necessarily have to be the fifth house. But I think this is important because the fifth house is ruled by Leo naturally, and that's where you're coming from your heart. You're stepping into courage and you're aligning yourself with a deeper knowing and letting that be your true north. So here, this moon is getting into the depth of this Scorpio psychology, the parts of us that are so hidden that we don't even recognize that we will only operate under the praise of others or the approval of others or the finances of others. There can be a lot of other people's influence and power over our desires, our dreams, and what we want to experience for ourselves. So this focal point is giving you a feeling that something's missing, okay? And we have Saturn here involved in Aries. Saturn here at 9 degrees, and all yods should be within 3 degrees of one another. So what we're looking at is history coming up where the self has been limited, where there has been duty, obligation, where there's even a karmic element to this particular full moon. Because the outer planets have just moved. Uranus has finally moved into Gemini for the next 8 years. So the outer planets have clicked into the new element of air and fire. And this is the first full moon after that trilogy has settled. So Saturn represents karma, represents history of the self. And the 9th degree has a Mars energy to it. Am I willing to be brave and take action on it? And if the action is that I recognize that I have buried resentments and angers that have held me back, because now Venus is in 9 degrees of Gemini. This makes me feel, as I'm intuiting, like, what am I looking at from my childhood? How was I taught? What was I trained to think? How do I speak? How do I value myself in social settings? Do I believe that I'm smart enough? Because these quincunxes, again, are blind spots where the moon and Venus are not in conversation. They're in elements that are not complementary, and they just feel like they don't have anything in common to chat about. The same thing is kind of going with Saturn here in Aries. Now, to me, because Aries is co-ruled by Mars and this is a Scorpio moon, even though there's a quincunx, it plays a little differently for me. It plays more to the lower dynamic of Mars, where there's unsaid anger and resentment for me being dutiful, for doing what I was supposed to do, for following the rules, and nobody gave me my credit. The others in my life did not nurture me or care for me. They put me in a place of, having to constantly potentially be of service or of a hero energy to someone else. Now we have the sun in the middle, which is the boomerang, because this is really going to indicate whether or not your ego is underinflated, is not being recognized, is being masked in some way by emotional. You could even have an emotional numbness, almost like the energies have been so overpowering to you that you went flat, or you went quiet, or you got um, oftentimes in the Scorpio energy, there can feel, an abuser and an abusee. And often when you're the person being abused, you lose your fight and you just want to be quiet and you want to have as little attention on you as possible. Now, I'm not saying any of that's happening in the outside world to you right now, but you could have an imprint. You could have a perfectly great upbringing, but your parents are always like, there are bigger problems in the world. Money doesn't grow on trees. People who enjoy sex are whores and sluts and players. I mean, there could be a lot of buried belief systems because Venus is very much going to talk about your self-worth and what your self-worth has to do in the way of speaking your voice, your opinion, making your money, your relationships with the feminine dynamic, your relations with the feminine aspects of yourself. So we're looking at the feminine aspect of being a co-creator along with the intuitive nurturer, having this nagging feeling that there is a history that's holding me back. And the sun in the middle is asking for really redefinition, I think, to rise like the phoenix. We have, again, I briefly mentioned that Venus is conjunct the fixed star Aldebaran here at 10 degrees of Gemini. Aldebaran is Aldebaran is known as the Watcher of the East. Archangel Michael is the angel associated with it. When I think of Aldebaran, it's a new day, the Watcher of the East. Every day, the universe offers us a new dawn to begin again. It is one that really highlights and supports integrity and material success because of integrity or because of standing up for a deeper truth. We have the energy of the sacred warrior here. We see that this will bring tests of honor. So this is the kind of thing where, your boss leaves you by yourself in the days before there were cameras with a wad of cash. And, maybe you would miss a little money here or there. And if you have a personal planet near Aldebaran and you take that money, you can guarantee failure. You will fail the test and then there will be shame. But as you succeed and stand in that integrity, you will see yourself rise and rise in a way of respect and honor and people praising you for that. It's very much a star of destiny. So that's very powerful. So here we have Venus and Aldebaran together in a conjunction saying, will you stand in integrity for your own skills, your own talents, your own mind, your own voice, your own way of speaking? I know you can't necessarily feel this right now. You may not know how it's going to play out. You may still be under the challenge of whatever's going on in Scorpio for you. And I want to offer this because there is a Neptune was in Scorpio in the late 50s and early 60s, maybe even all the way through the 60s. I'd have to check because there's outer planets setting a dynamic here. And in the Scorpio energy, we also have the Shapley attractor, which is about 9 degrees away from this full moon. That's a very loose conjunction, but it is about releasing false attachments to things that have power and control over us because we ourselves see ourselves as weak. That's not necessarily true. It could be a human construct. So I also want to mention that Saturn and Venus both being at 9 degrees, there is that Martian degree. So there's a willingness to take brave action. It's also a degree of completion where we are finishing those first single digit numbers and moving into double digits. So it's the ending of a cycle of beginning. And I say that because it feels childlike, and this is again where I feel like Venus and Gemini is representing thoughts, beliefs, and teachings from yesteryear that I don't even recognize as not being law. They've always been that way for me, so they'll always be that way for me. Never occurred to me that they could be different. And yet you go to a different part of the world and you find out there's a whole different belief. Now, this moon is also being supported by the North Node in Pisces. It's not in a tight orb. So to me, this is kind of like background music. But there is during this period of time a faint awareness that the only way through this illumination is to continue to tap into my spiritual beliefs, my connections to the universe, to God, to the divine, and to my creativity. Very much my creativity. The sun rules the fifth house of Leo, where it is absolutely, happy to enjoy life, to do things that are pleasurable, to laugh, to feel frivolous, to believe in romance. And the moon in Scorpio is actually in fall. So in Scorpio, the moon is not necessarily feel so comfortable about expressing itself just naturally. And now it's at the apex of a transit yod where my history and my karma, represented by Saturn, the way I feel about myself and my self-worth and how that affects my social life, as represented by Venus. But Aldebaran is giving it an extra oomph, saying, Venus, stand in integrity. Don't worry about the other people right now. Don't worry about what they think. Anchor in on what you feel, and there you will feel your true north. And there you will find your true tribe. Now, let's look at the sun. How's the sun being affected during this full moon? It's clearly in an opposition to the moon, but it is in a trine to the south node. So this kind of tells me that most people on the planet don't really have an inflated ego as much as the word narcissist is used, but they don't. Oftentimes there's a lack of a feeling of value and a feeling of deserving. And with the sun in Taurus, there's always this feeling of wanting to be very financially fiscal, make sure things are steady, that nothing is coming out of nowhere. But as the sun makes this trine to the south node in Virgo, and again, this is it's a loose trine. We're looking at 5 degrees here. I do think that there is an opportunity to assess the processes I'm using to grow myself. The South Node in Virgo is asking me to let go of perfectionism. And within the Virgo energy, there is also a layer of history because Virgo looks at history and the processes and the statistics of how things have been done in order to determine how to move them forward. So I think the trine aspect is really about supporting the ego and the self and the heart and having the courage to stand in my skills, stand in my willingness and ability to make my own money and not have to depend on others for material resources. That's what I want to say. Now, the other thing that was interesting, and I don't know why it's not coming up now. Oops. Let me just quickly click on Venus. Okay. All right. Let me click off the chart for a minute. What I want to say here about this full moon is that these periods of time that the stars are aligning, they're offering us a real glimpse into our soul. Scorpio rules the occult. It rules, on a very deep level of awareness when it comes to the psychological makeup and vulnerabilities of being a human, which is why it rules death and rebirth. Not every death is a physical death and a loss. Sometimes it's the loss of a dream that when we look a little bit deeper underneath that dream, we realize that we were just scared to be powerful. So we looked elsewhere for someone to be powerful for us and thinking that dream would bring us ease. But that's not really how the human soul works, the human spirit works. It likes to strive and achieve through that, which is why we enjoy competition and we enjoy creativity. So during this full moon, be mindful of how you're allowing yourself to go through the process of empowerment. Because you might find that the biggest obstacle is that powerful people are scorned. Often the female is referred to with unpleasant names. And many times men that are very powerful are also the object of scorn or of some sort of ridicule. And I think that's part of the nature of the beast, because there does take a certain amount of self-focus to be intentional enough to create our dreams. And that can sometimes make people who are fearful of that want to kind of keep you in a lower vibration. I don't know if that made sense. What I'm trying to say essentially is sometimes as we chase our dreams, other people's fears, trepidations, or even their own lack of ability to create their dreams can be interruptive, and not necessarily negatively. They could trigger you through questions like, well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that? And you don't know how you're going to do it because right now you're just working on a moon's operating basis. You're feeling something. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic moving forward as we experience Uranus in Gemini and Neptune continuing in Aries, and of course, Pluto in Aquarius. So thanks for watching. Please like, please subscribe, please share, please comment. Tell me where you're from in the world. I'd be so curious. And how you've experienced this moon. It's going to be conjunct my natal Mercury. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see what it will illuminate for me, whether it will come from inside of my own mental psyche, or will it come in the form of a sibling or someone in my neighborhood, or potentially even a teammate that I have worked with. You never know. All right, everybody, take care. Peace out.